Okay, so for the digestive system, some of these structures are very easy. We've even done some of them in the respiratory stuff. The mouth, the oral cavity, that is where your tongue and your teeth and everything are. The palate is divided into both the hard palate and the soft palate. The hard palate is that bone. You can feel it in the very front of your mouth, kind of behind your teeth, and you kind of run your tongue all the way back. That's your hard palate. Your hard palate eventually becomes your soft palate. It transforms from your hard palate into the soft palate where the bone ends. And then it's continuous with your uvula. So your uvula is the little dangly thing that hangs in the back of your throat. And that's part of your soft palate. The lingual frenulum, that is the little piece of skin that's under your tongue that ties your tongue down and holds your tongue down. When people are tongue-tied, that frenulum, that little piece of skin, is extra short, and so they can't move their tongue properly for our speech. They usually have to have that cut if it's bad enough. So that's the oral cavity, very straightforward. That's the mouth cavity. That's the nasal cavity. That's the hardest thing with sagittal sections, is that people tend to confuse the nasal cavity for the oral cavity. So like, that's your tongue. Look for the tongue. In the tooth, so the incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. The incisors are the teeth in the front. The canines are the pointy ones on the sides. And then you have premolars and molars. Connect has all of those laid out for you. I'll let you look at them. If you have all of your wisdom teeth, you're supposed to have 32 teeth total. I had my wisdom teeth taken out and I had some adult teeth removed, so I only have 24 teeth. I have little teeth. I always think it's interesting to see who else might have these. I have these little hooks on the inside of my molars, on the last two teeth, on each side, top and bottom. Just these tiny little hooks on the inside. And I found out, I asked the dentist, they're structures from when we used to just basically rip meat off the bone, so they're there to help you tear meat. So if you have a little hook showing inside your mouth, and like they're kind of sharp, like they're not gonna, like I don't cut my tongue on them, but like I can definitely like feel like a poke and a point on them. I do not like hold any titles for wing eating or like steak chewing, but they're there. So parts of the tooth. Start with the gingiva. The gingiva is your gum. So the gum line is your gingiva, gingivitis, right? That's some gingivitis. The crown is the portion of the tooth above the gingiva. So the part that you can see, the portion of that tooth above the gingiva, is the crown. The portion below the gingiva is the root. Very straightforward. The enamel is this outer covering. So the enamel is that outer covering of the tooth. That's like what you're tapping and what you can touch. Sodas, I had braces for years. Those kind of things will start to wear away at the enamel, causing you to be more susceptible to cavities. The dentin and the pulp. The dentin is the main like internal body of the tooth. So the enamel is just the outer covering of the dentin. And the dentin is the hardest structure in your body. So that's not the dentin. It's these little horizontal portions. That's the dentin. The space inside, that's the pulp. So the pulp is this the space inside the dentin, the deepest part inside of the dentin. The salivary glands, your parotid, submandibular, and sublingual. The parotid is on the side of the head, just in front of the ear. So you have two, one on each side. The submandibular are underneath the mandible, so the most inferior, right along there. And then the sublingual is just underneath the tongue, most anterior. So that's the sublingual. The pharynx, that is your throat. So for the digestive system, it's just the oro and the laryngopharynx. Those are the only portions. If we were talking respiratory system, we would include the nasopharynx in there, but we're not, so we don't. The esophagus is a tube that travels from the laryngopharynx to the stomach. It is just a muscular tube. It has two sphincters. It has the upper esophageal sphincter and a lower esophageal sphincter that connects to the stomach. That lower sphincter has three names. It's the lower sphincter, the cardiac sphincter, or the gastroesophageal sphincter. Really, you can use any name. It depends on primarily what structure you're talking about. Obviously, if you're referring to the esophagus, you would call it lower esophageal sphincter. If it's the stomach, you would be talking about the cardiac sphincter. So the cardiac sphincter is, if the stomach sits right in here, it's that very most kind of superior sphincter, just controlling the movement of food into the stomach. If you have acid reflux or gastric reflux, it's because this sphincter starts to open and it will send material from here back up into the esophagus. So that's why that one is called that. So then let's move into the stomach. So the region of the stomach. So as I was saying, this is the cardiac sphincter. You also have the pyloric sphincter, which exits the stomach. So material comes in through the cardiac sphincter and it goes out through the pyloric sphincter. The stomach has 4 parts to it. So food will come in through the cardia. I'll say material is a better word, I guess. Material will come in through the cardiac sphincter, and that's the first portion of the stomach, is the cardia. So this very first region is the cardia. Food then moves over to the fundus. So it comes in the cardia, it moves over to the fundus, which is this rounded kind of bulbous portion right here. Then you have the body, which is this more middle section. That's where food's gonna spend a lot of its time getting churned and mixed with gastric juices and broken down. And then kind of right where you see this constriction and then this bulge at the end here, this is the pylorus. So that's the 4th section of the stomach. Cardia, fundus, body, pylorus. And again, at this point, when it exits the pylorus, it's called chyme. And it will just exit a little bit at a time. It's not like, you eat a whole meal, it sits in your stomach, gets digested and broken down, and then that whole meal leaves out through the pylorus. The pyloric sphincter lets out a little bit of fluid at a time because at this point it is very much a fluid, it is a liquid substance. There's so much gastric juice that gets mixed in there. And so the pyloric sphincter will let out a little bit at a time as the pressure of the fluid in here builds up, it kind of shoots out. But then the sphincter closes up, and as it closes up, it's so powerful that it actually pushes the fluid back and causes it to mix with itself. We call it retropulsion. So you have this very kind of high pressured space shooting out through into the small intestine, but this closes and causes even more mixing and churning of those gastric contents. The gastric folds, the rugae, those are internal structures, these little ridges that allow it to expand, the stomach to expand and grow. We did the pyloric sphincter. The curvatures, the lesser and greater curvatures of the spine just refer to these external superficial structures. So the lesser curvature is this smaller one that kind of sits on the inner curve of the stomach, whereas the greater curvature is this more outer, bigger one, just longer one really. And then the muscularis layers. So within your GI tract, you have a consistent muscular layer. Usually it's only 2 layers. You have a circular and a longitudinal, but in the stomach we have 3 layers. There's an extra oblique layer that gets added in there. So you have this most internal oblique layer, then you have a circular layer in the middle, and then a superficial longitudinal layer. And so between those 3 actions of longitudinal, circular, and oblique constriction, you really get this churning and mixing of contents in the stomach. That's why it has that extra layer. Questions about the stomach? Cool. I'm gonna keep on going. So let me put my stomach back on. As chyme exits the stomach, it gets emptied into the small intestine. What's the first portion of the small intestine called? Does anybody know? It's that first one on your list? The duodenum. So the stomach from the pyloric sphincter empties directly into the duodenum. The small intestine is the primary site for absorption of nutrients and liquids. That's mainly what it's going to be doing. It's absorbing stuff. The very first portion, the duodenum, is really concerned with neutralizing that acidic chyme. So the stuff coming out of the stomach is usually pretty acidic because their stomach is acidic. And so one of the big things that it's trying to do is neutralize that chyme, release bile. So bile gets released into the duodenum, and pancreatic juices. So enzymes like amylases, proteases, nucleases to help digest those macromolecules. So this is the duodenum. This is kind of the beginning of the duodenum right here. I'm trying to hold, holding my small intestine together. So food will come into this portion right here, and this is where it's going to start to mix. There's your pancreas. You have a little duct that releases pancreatic juices and bile into this space of the duodenum where it mixes with all of that chyme. Again, it's being released in small amounts into the small intestine. The second portion of the small intestine is the jejunum, and then the third portion is the ileum. I always say, I'm not gonna say, like, point to a fold and say, which fold is that? Is that the jejunum or the ileum? I'm not gonna do that. Your book does have a highlighted picture where it highlights the different sections of the small intestine, so I'd expect you to be able to pick it up from that. So know that picture from your book, but as far as this model, I'm not going to just point to a spot and say, what is that? I would expect you to know, though, the arrangement. So duodenum is first. So if I point to that, you should be able to tell me that's the duodenum. That's pretty straightforward. If I asked you what the middle section is, you should say the jejunum. And then the third section, the final section, is the ileum. That's the one that is going to transport from the small intestine into the large intestine. That's going to be connecting those two. The circular folds, the plicae circularis, those are macroscopic structures. So the circular folds, if you ever look at diagrams of the small intestine, get that out of the way, the small intestine, it's going to have these ridges on it, and those are the circular folds. And their job is to help slow down the movement of chyme and materials. So you have in your small intestine a lot of villi and microvilli. Those are microscopic. Those are on the cells, very, very microscopic structures. These circular folds, if you were to open someone up and split open their duodenum and their small intestine, you would see those with your naked eye. You could see the circular folds. The hepatopancreatic sphincter. So we call it this is going from your pancreas into your duodenum. Because again, that's where in your duodenum is where you have the chyme mixing with your pancreatic juices and your bile. So the pancreatic juice and the bile enter the duodenum through the hepatopancreatic sphincter, which is just a little, and even on this one you can't see it. This one? Yeah. So on this model you can see that you have this small little hole right there. A little hole right there. And that's the hepatopancreatic sphincter. So that's where this duct from your pancreas and what we'll learn is called your common bile duct coming from the liver and gallbladder. That's where those two vessels insert into the duodenum to release their juice. Okay, so it's just a little sphincter right there in the duodenum. Okay, feel okay about the small intestine? Yeah. Large intestine. So a lot of times, and even on this sheet, the large intestine and the colon are used interchangeably. Technically, the colon is part of the large intestine. So your large intestine is your cecum and your appendix, the ascending, transverse, the ascending, transverse, and descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum and anus. So your large intestine goes from your cecum all the way to your anus. Whereas your colon is only 4 things: the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. So that's just a clarification point. When you talk about the large intestine versus colon, they are different things technically. So the beginning, that movement from the ileum, the small intestine, into the large intestine, that movement is controlled through the ileocecal sphincter. This little sphincter that is going to open in response to both material from the ileum and signals from higher up in the digestive system. Because the digestive system has this really, just kind of, I think, cool way of regulating itself. If you start to think about food, if you're starting to plan out your lunch, your brain will send signals to the rest of your digestive system to make sure things have moved along. So there's space for food and new food in your stomach, and new chyme in your small intestine, and new feces in your large intestine. That way nothing gets backed up. The stomach, the brain and enteric nervous system have that regulation. So once material goes from the ileum through the valve, through the ileocecal valve into the cecum, it kind of sits in this little pouch, and then it's supposed to go up into the ascending colon. Sometimes it goes, and this one has a nice little kind of section, you can see it goes into the appendix, which is this little tail on the back of the large intestine. If material goes into there and it gets stuck in there for too long, it can start to become infected and you have to get your appendix removed. Somebody asked me if some people are more susceptible to it or not, and I do not know the answer to that. I don't know if there's if your appendix gets wrapped into a certain position, does that make it more likely for the material to get in there? I don't know. But they are seeing more and more evidence for it having an immune function. So people that have their spleen removed, they can sometimes be treated, or their spleen, that have their appendix removed will sometimes be treated as slightly immunocompromised, just because the appendix does hold some immune cells. So we take it out only in emergencies. Again, the colon has 4 basic sections. Ascending goes up, the transverse going across, and here's how it sits in your body, right about there. This one's very tiny. This is like a 12-year-old's. Your ascending, your transverse, and your descending colon. You can even see it on there. And then where it makes this little curve right here, this is your sigmoid colon. Okay, so that's your sigmoid colon. From the sigmoid colon, I'm gonna have to bring this one back up. From your sigmoid colon, you start to go into your rectum, and then you have your anus, rather your anal canal and your anus. The most common sites for colon cancer, just because feces sits there the longest, are the descending sigmoid colon and the rectum. Feces, so in the large intestine, chyme from the small intestine gets compacted into feces as it travels through the large intestine. It's losing water and getting compacted into feces. It will sit in the sigmoid colon, usually that's kind of where it sits the longest, until it moves into the rectum. Once it moves into the rectum, there are baroreceptors that will detect that stretch and start to send signals for defecation. So usually when just the longer something sits, that's where cancer tends to develop. So that's why rectum, sigmoid, and descending colons have the highest rate of colon cancers as far as locations.
Why would this sit there?
Because that's, we don't just constantly poop. If we were constantly defecating, then it wouldn't sit there. But because we hold it, because we can retain our bowels. Most of us are going to defecate 1 to 2 times a day. Some people more, some people less. Doctors will argue about how many times a day you can poop. I have heard internal medicine doctors say 5 times a day. You should be going 5, right? That's a lot. I have things to do. so like twice a day, that's a pretty normal amount. But again, normal is so subjective. I have a friend who swears he only goes 3 times a day. He's like, that's just how I've always been. I'm like, something's weird about that, but okay. So yeah, that's why it sits there longer, is because it has to build up enough for us to actually get the signal to have to go. Because it's all going to be, unless you're really straining and trying to push and clear out your large intestines, it has to get moved along. There has to be, it has to get kind of pushed, and then by the time it gets to your rectum, that will send the signal to defecate. Low fiber diets, if you don't have enough fiber in your diet, then that causes fecal matter to move slower, and so it doesn't, you don't defecate as much, you tend to be more constipated, because the longer fecal matter sits in your large intestine, the more water gets drawn out of it, and so then the harder it becomes to defecate. So fiber is a really great, insoluble fiber is a really good way to make sure that things just keep moving. A couple more things. The rectum, so yeah, you have your rectum, then you have your anal canal, and actually, that one doesn't have an anus. The anal sphincters, you have an internal anal sphincter and then an external anal sphincter. So the internal is closest to that anal canal, to that little passageway of the anus. That's going to be your most internal one, and then the one just outside of those are your external. The internal anal sphincter is involuntary. You get a parasympathetic signal, and it causes it to relax. And again, that's going to be from stretching. So once feces enters into the rectum, it'll stretch, send signals to your brain. That'll send another signal to those internal sphincters to relax. And then we just have the external sphincter that is voluntarily controlled. We control how that opens and relaxes. Last little bits. You have the tinea coli, or the mesentery, the Haustra, and the tinea coli. The mesentery is not one specific thing. The mesentery is several different structures of connective tissue that help to support and protect the intestines. So we talked about this actually in the circulatory system with vessels, the superior mesenteric vein and splenic mesentery vein. So when you hear mesentery, just think intestines, just think digestive system and an intestinal system, because your mesenteric veins drain to your liver, And your mesentery, again, it's several different structures that we collectively call the mesentery. It's like this stuff, this connective tissue that's holding the large intestine together, that's mesentery. And the stuff on the back of the small intestine that's kind of connecting it, that's mesentery too. So that's all part of your mesenteric system. You have what's called the greater omentum that hangs from your stomach and drapes over your abdomen. And they call it the greater omentum, also the lacy apron, the fatty apron. They call it things like that because it does kind of hang over your belly like an apron, and it's made, it has a lot of fat deposits in it, and you can kind of see through portions of it. So if you ever see someone doing abdominal surgery, they always have to cut the greater omentum off and lift it up and out of the way to actually expose the deeper abdominal contents. The Haustra. The Haustra are these little bulges of the large intestine. So each of these little pouches is considered a Haustra. And it just refers to the fact that helps the large intestine to segment the different, the compacting feces so that it can get even more water and extract even more electrolytes out of it. So you have these little pouches that get formed, and they get formed because of this tendon. This tendon is your tinea coli. So this tendon that runs all the way up and across and then back down, that causes the intestine to bunch into these little pouches. Okay. Feel okay about the large intestine? Yeah. Liver. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because it'll be recorded, so you can go back and look at it again. But just to walk you through your liver. So your liver is your largest organ in your body. It will regenerate itself. If you donate your liver, they'll take a piece of it, they'll put that in someone else, it will grow in them, and then yours will regenerate itself. And your liver can lose 85% of its function, of its functional ability before you really have any impaired or any noticeable symptoms. So it has a lot of redundancy. It only needs to have 15% of it functioning, or it can still function even when there's only 15% of it left. That's pretty awesome. It's a very, very important organ. So when we look at the liver, you can see it has, here we go. It has a thin little tail, that's the left side. It has this bigger lobe, that's the right lobe. So left lobe and right lobe. This is the vena cava. So this is the posterior portion of the liver. So it's kind of like how it would be sitting basically in y'all. So here's the liver, or here's the vena cava. Beside the vena cava, this lobe is called the caudate lobe. So cava, caudate, that's how I remember it. The vena cava and the caudate lobe. Left lobe, right lobe. If we flip it upside down, you see a lot of things. First you have the gallbladder. That's this green gallbladder. Beside the gallbladder is the quadrate lobe. So we have left lobe, right lobe, quadrate, and caudate. So there's the 4 lobes. The falciform ligament, this is the falciform ligament and the round ligament. Those were part of fetal structures. So remember fetal circulation, you have the ductus venosus that bypasses the liver. Those ligaments are just remnants of that. Okay, vessels, 2 vessels going into the liver. You have the red hepatic artery. That's going to bring fresh oxygen and nutrients to the liver. You have the purple hepatic portal vein, the hepatic portal vein. That brings nutrient-rich but oxygen-poor blood from the intestines. So remember, our intestines, we have kind of all these mesenteric veins that are draining from the small and large intestines. They all gather, and with the splenic veins, they become the hepatic portal vein. So it's bringing blood to be filtered through the liver. And you can see it divides, and the hepatic artery and the portal vein all separate, and they go into the little lobules deep into the liver. And then all of those veins are going to gather and collect back into your hepatic veins. So the blue vessels, the pure blue vessels that you see, are your hepatic veins. They all gather into the vena cava and send blood back into the heart. So 2 vessels entering the liver, hepatic artery and hepatic portal vein. You gotta say that makes a difference. The hepatic artery, hepatic portal vein, and then the hepatic veins draining into the vena cava. Now you'll also see that there are green vessels. There are green vessels laced all throughout the liver. Those are your bile ductules. So the liver is producing bile. It takes the hepatic artery and the hepatic portal vein, filters all of those bloods out, all that blood out, and it produces bile in the process. So all of these bile ductules are going to gather into two vessels. You have a left hepatic duct and a right hepatic duct. So again, left comes from the little lobe. So left and right hepatic ducts, they merge to form the common hepatic duct. It's not too wild. Left and right merge to make a common. Coming from your gallbladder, you have what's called the cystic duct. So your gallbladder, if you ever see cyst or cholecyst, that's referring to your gallbladder. You have this common hepatic duct and your cystic duct. They can actually merge and form this right here. This vessel will go off to the pancreas. It's your common bile duct. So the common hepatic duct and the cystic duct merge to form the common bile duct that takes bile to the pancreas and duodenum. Now, what else can happen is that as bile is being formed, it can go into the hepatic duct, and then instead of going out the bile duct to the pancreas, it can go up the cystic duct and get stored in the gallbladder. Because that's the function of the gallbladder, is to store and concentrate bile. If you have your gallbladder removed, then you usually have to adjust diet, so that way you're only eating usually small amounts of fatty things at a time, so your liver can produce bile and release it directly into your intestines. So two paths for bile. Either through the hepatic duct, up the cystic duct to be stored in the gallbladder, or out the cystic duct, out the common bile duct to the pancreas. Okay? And that's the liver. Your gallbladder, so again, your cystic artery is just going to be the artery on your gallbladder. We don't have a vein picture on this. And the last one is the pancreas. So your pancreas has three large structures. It has both a tail, which is just the little, so here's how it sits in your body. You have your spleen over here to the side. You have the tail of the pancreas, the body of the pancreas, and then the bulging head, the bulbous head. So straightforward, nothing weird there, tail, body, head. There are two ducts in your pancreas. You have the pancreatic duct, the major pancreatic duct. That's the one that joins with that common bile duct we just saw coming from the liver. Common bile duct and pancreatic duct, they join and exit through the hepatopancreatic sphincter. So hepatopancreatic sphincter, you have your common bile duct and your pancreatic duct. So that's how it gets its name. Remember, that's going to go out through that sphincter into the duodenum and release bile and pancreatic juice. The other duct, the accessory pancreatic duct, is this one that you can see that branches off of the major pancreatic duct. It's that little one that has that branch there. That's just a remnant. It also will insert into, you can't really see it on this model, but it inserts as well, that accessory duct, into the duodenum and empties just pancreatic juice. Whereas the major duct merges with the bile duct to release both. The accessory duct only releases pancreatic juices. Okay, any questions about that digestive, like just the structures? So it's pretty straightforward. It's not too wild one. Okay, I want to go through a couple of these tables just to make sure we're feeling okay about table 2 and table 3. So page 121. I'm going to let you do page 120 on your own because it'll give you good practice with just making sure you can associate organ or structure to organ, locating things, giving the general location, and brief functions. But for table 2, let's get into this real quick. Table 2. So the liver. What is the name of the entire secretion from the liver? Comes out through that duct. Bile. Yeah, you don't have to. Bile. The components of bile, you have water, bicarbonate, bile salts, pigments, cholesterol, some lecithin, some mucin. So that's a little bit of everything. Three main functions. It's going to neutralize acidic chyme. Again, chyme coming from the stomach. It's going to aid in mechanical digestion of lipids. And eliminate bilirubin from red blood cell destruction. So your liver helps to break down red blood cells, and it's going to eliminate that bilirubin as a waste product. That's why your feces is brown. So it's the bicarbonate that will neutralize that acidic chyme. You're going to have your bile salts and lecithin digesting fats. And again, the bilirubin provides a pigment. The pancreas, it releases collectively what we call pancreatic juice. It's going to have water, bicarbonate, and pancreatic amylase, protease, nucleases, and lipase. So pancreatic juice is a combination of water, bicarb, and 4 different enzymes that will help to digest macromolecules. So digestion of macros, buffer chyme, regulate. Actually, no, I'm not good at that. Remember, your pancreas also produces glucagon and insulin to regulate blood pressure. That would be its endocrine functions. These are its exocrine functions. Enzymes and bicarbonate. Last one is the salivary gland. Its secretion name is saliva. Saliva has water, electrolytes, amylase, lipase, lysozymes, and mucin. So your saliva is not just water, it is a combination of things, including 2 enzymes. Remember, if you haven't watched the lecture yet, salivary amylase is active in the mouth, so as soon as it starts getting released, it starts activating. Lipase is inactive. By the time it gets to the stomach, after about 10 or 15 minutes, the low pH of the stomach deactivates amylase and activates the lipase. So they switch. Its functions are going to be to moisten food. This will stimulate taste receptors. So if your food and mouth are dry, your food will not taste as intensely. It's going to digest macromolecules from the enzymes. It cleans the oral cavity from the lysozymes. And inhibits bacterial growth. Any questions about those secretions and their main functions? Okay, I want to do the one on the ducts, and then we'll be finished. Because tables 1 and 4 are very straightforward, I think. Can I erase?
When is that?
Oh, yep.
When-
I'm going to erase the top 2.
Okay.
Okay, so for table 3, it's all about the ducts. I'm going to abbreviate common bile ductal. The common bile duct is carrying bile. From this location, so the common bile duct is carrying bile from these things. What do you think your answers would be for this one? Any guesses? If you think about what 2 ducts have to come together to make your common bile duct. You have the common hepatic duct. So where the left and right hepatic ducts join, they make the common hepatic, and your cystic duct from your gallbladder. Once those 2 join, then you get your common bile duct. So it's carrying bile from these things to where? Where does the common bile duct go to? What organ? Oh, you know it.
Duodenum?
So before the duodenum, what does it have to go through to get to the duodenum? It joins with what other duct? In your pancreas. So common bile duct is taking bile from these 2 to the pancreas, where it joins with the pancreatic duct and empties into the duodenum. But really, it's going to the pancreas. If you had put duodenum, I probably would have given you credit. Left hepatic duct. This one's pretty straightforward. Bile from the left lobe, because it's the left hepatic duct. It's going to the common hepatic duct. This is what usually confuses people. They would have said left hepatic duct is going from the left lobe to the common bile duct, but it's not. The left and right ducts have to join to make the common hepatic duct first. So for right hepatic duct, I'm going to let you do that one because it is just a copy of that one, of the left. Pancreatic duct. What is our pancreatic duct carrying? What do we call that common secretion from the pancreas? Pancreatic juice. Pancreatic juice. So the pancreatic duct is carrying pancreatic juice from the pancreas. And where does the pancreas empty into? What specific location of an organ? I said it before.
Duodenum.
Duodenum. There it is. Duodenum. If you just put small intestine, I would give you half credit. The common hepatic duct. Remember we said our left and right form the common hepatic duct. So it's carrying bile, still in the liver, from the left and right bile ducts. Actually, left and right hepatic ducts, sorry. The 2 in this one, so the common hepatic duct, remember, can either empty into the common bile duct and send bile straight into the pancreas, or the common hepatic duct can send bile up into the gallbladder through the cystic duct where it can be stored. So when we talk about where the common hepatic duct is going, we have to say both the common bile duct and the cystic duct. And essentially, your cystic duct just has, your bile duct, common bile duct, just has a valve that it can divert bile up into the gallbladder or down into the pancreas. Okay, the last one is the cystic duct. Move over here. It is carrying bile, still just bile. So this is coming from the gallbladder. Oh, no. And it's going to the common bile duct. Because again, it's the common bile duct that takes bile out of the liver, or out of the gallbladder. So the only thing that's taking bile to the pancreas is going to be the common bile duct. The cystic duct just takes it from the gallbladder. And yeah, like I said, table 1, table 2, you shouldn't have too much trouble, or table 4, shouldn't have too much trouble. Because table 4 is just about the sphincters and controlling movement through the digestive system.